This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO Crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. I am, in fact, the host, Kevin Randle. I'll be joined here momentarily by Don Schmitt. And Don, by the way, if you have comment, fling it in here because I'm going to do a bit of a rant. And it has to do with the people who are reviewing stuff on Amazon and whatnot. And it just kind of annoys me. And I get that no matter how perfect a book is, there are going to be people who don't like it. And one of the examples I think of is I just watched The Great Escape this last week. So I looked up the reviews on that movie, and there were people who absolutely hated it or disliked it and gave it bad ratings. And part of it I understood because The Great Escape, when it took place from Stalag Luft 3, it was all British, all English, all Commonwealth people. The Americans had been moved to a separate camp, so they weren't participants. And a lot of people condemned the movie because they had a couple of Americans in the movie in prominent roles, James Garner and Steve McQueen, to name two of them. And so I understand that. But what I don't like is people who reject a book, not because they've read it and dislike it. They don't like the subject matter, they don't like the title, or they don't like the author. And I get that, I've offended people out there in the world of ufology, and I was going to say rightly so. It's really not rightly so. It's because I have an opinion that is less oriented toward the extraterrestrial than most of them have. And I don't embrace everything. I look at the evidence. I look at the facts. I want to know what's going on. One guy gave a bad review to, or a bad rating to Roswell in the 21st century. And his whole argument was there's no such thing as aliens. And I thought, well, if you read the book, you wouldn't have made that comment. So it's clear to me he hadn't read the book. If you read the book and you dislike it and you have reasons you dislike it, I'm on board. I got it. I understand it. But if you haven't read the book, I just wish you wouldn't bother to review it. And some of the reviews, the negative toward reviews, have some good comments in them that I take to heart and try to change. But another comment was the guy didn't like the book because it arrived in bad shape. That's not my fault. I didn't ship the book. I didn't print the book. It's something to do with the publisher and the distribution. It has nothing to do with me or anything else. So I just thought I'd mention that to those who are listening, because I think we've reached the point in the world today where everybody has a computer, everybody has an opinion, and not all the opinions are worthwhile. I think that people publish stuff in their online that they would never say in public. They hide behind the anonymity of the keyboard to make very obnoxious statements about things. And I just wish that people would be a little bit more civil in their tone. Appoint me the civil officer of the world here. I'm advocating for civility amongst all of us here to go on. Anyway, that was kind of my rant. I just hope people will at least give a book a reading before they write a review, a criticism of the book. And if they have a criticism, that the criticism actually makes some sense, that sort of thing. As I said, I'm going to be joined by Don Schmitt. He's sitting there. We are now socially distanced, not because we want to be, but because we just happen to live in different states. And this is the way we do it. Otherwise, we'd probably be sitting in the same room without masks, violating every mandate we can find to violate. At least I would be, just to be arbitrary about the whole situation. What we're going to do here is a wrap up of what's gone on ufologically in the last 12 months. There's been a lot of stuff going on, and I know that Don has a lot of opinions about it, and so do I. Don, welcome to A Different Perspective once again.
Well, great to be back with you, Kevin. And just to chime in and actually reinforce your own as far as editorial remarks, as far as on reviews of our works, our books. I don't care if it's our writing, our art, our what have you. That obviously it's created a whole new climate throughout society. That, as you pointed out, they don't even have to read our books. They don't have to read page one. It's amazing how often you read a review and it's like, are they even talking about the same book? A current book we have out on Roswell is basically just celebrities who have been touched by Roswell, who have been there, were born there, went to school there, went to the military institute. And somebody chimed in and commented about it was the same old research. And it's like, you obviously didn't even read the title of the book. And yet you're writing a review. So it basically, go back to school, leave the writing to the authors, and try it yourself someday. And we'll make it a point not to read your tomes. So
I think the important thing is if you read a book and you don't like it for whatever reason, I mean, Stephen King and J.K. Rowling gets bad reviews, and there's just something that turns a person off about a book. And if it's a legitimate complaint, I'm all for it. Let's hear what it is. But if it's just, I just don't like the subject matter, I don't like you, I don't like the cover of the book, that's certainly not a grounds for criticism.
Speaking of cover of a book, remember our first together UFO crash at Roswell, and it had the Dan Fry spinning top jacket. we were appalled. It was like, how do we change this? How do we get this hoax, contact me photograph off of our book? And as you recall too, that it was Avon at that time inserted. I mean, how many errors, mistakes in the book? I mean, they didn't even spell Hynek right. And if anybody knew how to spell Hynek, we certainly did. Dr. J. Allen Hynek. And but bottom line, it's the author's fault. It's always the author.
Well, I think it's time to move on, and let's pick on another author.
Yes.
And I'm thinking specifically of Jacques Vallée and Trinity. Mm-hmm. I've got some stuff up on my blog about Trinity. I interviewed Vallée and
Paula Harris, right?
Paula Harris on the book. She said very little in the interview. It was mostly Vallée, which was fine with me. I tried to drag her into it.
Which is interesting because the general consensus is that she wrote the book.
Well, I was surprised that Vallée lent his name to it until I read something in the last week. And there was Vallée's got a scientific peer-reviewed paper coming out, I think, next month. You can find it online, and I'll have a link to it on my blog, about what he called 10 unexplained UFO sightings that had metallic debris associated with them. I don't know if you've seen the paper or not.
I know of its availability, right?
Yeah, and the problem is, when I look at that stuff, there's at least 2 of the cases that he talks about that are hoaxes. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what sort of analysis of the metal is going to do you any good if the case is a hoax. And I'm thinking specifically of Maury Island. He mentions Texas, the Aurora, Texas crash.
Aurora, Texas, that's the one that really floored me. I mean, it's like, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, in the paper, he said that, it looks like it might be a hoax, but he leaves the door open that there might be something to it. Maury Island is clearly a hoax, and he has some information about that in the paper. Some of the other stuff comes from Frank Edwards, and Frank Edwards was horribly inaccurate in his books. I mean, if you look at what he wrote about Roswell and UFO, Flying Saucer Serious Business, right. He got the name of the place right, Roswell.
Right.
That was about it.
That's about it, yeah.
I talked about Brazel. He didn't know Brazel's name, called him the rancher, seeing the object fly low over the ranch house and explode. And he called the sheriff. And I'm thinking, the debris field was 10 miles from the house. 10
miles from the ranch house, correct.
And there was hilly country in between the ranch house and where it came down, so he couldn't have seen it crash. He had no phone.
No phone, and it was always interesting. Remember, we used to ask like the locals in that Corona region, because they would talk about how they would, on Sunday, their day of rest, they would typically go into Corona for the lone payphone, the phone booth in the entire area. and they would take turns on the phone. And we just asked, well, given no one has a phone, who are you calling? And they would laugh and they joke, well, we just would dial any number. And it was just such a thrill to talk to somebody over a phone. So, and they didn't get phone service in the area until 1986. So
and now we carry phones around in our pocket.
Right. They'll try to get a decent signal out there, but
but with Vallée, he endorses the San Antonio crash, and for those of you who might not know, these two gentlemen claimed as youngsters they saw a UFO crash near San Antonio, New Mexico, which is not all that far from Socorro, and between Socorro and Roswell, and talked about the recovery operation. And Vallée lent his name to this book that is just has absolutely no good data in it. I think you talked to one of the men involved in this, Ramy Baca.
Yeah, Ramy Baca. I had just lectured in Ventura, California, in 1995, just north of LA. And I was approached, and they introduced him, thinking that he was a possible first-hand witness. And the information he provided in telling me, not first of all, that it was connected to Roswell. He was very specific about that, saying that it was 1947, and he talked about the plains. Well, I assumed the plains of San Augustine. And as we both know, the plains is often representative of a particular ranch, any one ranch where they might refer to an area as the plains. It's typically a flatter stretch of pasture, that type of thing. Whereas, for you and I, the plains is synonymous with the plains of San Augustine, west of Socorro. And the original attempt by Bill Moore and vis-a-vis Stan Friedman in trying to tie the Barney Barnett story, the civil engineer, his account that he described to his boss, I believe it was Fleck Danley, around 1950. And they tried to tie the Barnett story to Roswell because it smacked of bodies, it smacked of a craft. So beyond just the wreckage.
That was the point. I think it was the only information they had early on that talked about bodies.
Correct.
Because there was nothing out of Roswell that talked about it. No. So they needed that connection to make the alien connection.
Absolutely. And so in being introduced to him, I really didn't ponder it any further because I thought, just another plain San Augustine story, that type of thing. And yet he bought a copy of one of the Roswell books, so he would become versed, and he was schooled. He had attended the lecture, obviously. So as we both then witnessed with the Vallée Harris book, that much of it is taken right from the Roswell account. How much of it that is strictly Roswell in origin, and yet there it is, and both Vallée and really problematic for the fact that Vallée is the one accepting this now when he really never had anything good to say about Roswell heretofore. He just kind of always, it's too nuts and bolts. And we know Vallée's history, and he's now come full circle because he started out as Hynek, is accepting that we were dealing with an actual physical phenomena that interacted with the environment. He tracked it on radar, aside from visual observation and physiological effects on witnesses. And then the whole idea as far as that is, as Hynek too was a bit of a mystic, that Vallée got more and more into the esoteric, the paranormal. He was trying to tie this all together, even into ancient folklore. And I think that's where many within ufology then started to write him off, that he was getting into the fringe and was no longer one of us, so to speak.
Well, let me interrupt you there because I'm going to have to break away to take our first break. We're talking with Don Schmitt, obviously, about what's gone on in the last 12 months with UFOs, and we'll get into a lot of other aspects of it as well. One of the big things, of course, was the Vallée book, Trinity. So we'll talk about that. My latest book apparently is Leveland, which will be available for publication on January 6th. You can take a look at the front cover on Amazon, which I think is a stunning cover. So I'm delighted with that. Don, your latest book is Conversations with the...
Let me get...
Well, no, we'll break away from here. We'll be back right after this with Don Schmitt with the name of his book. So please stick around. And I am here with Don Schmitt. We're talking about the year in review, I guess, which the things you do at the end of the year. When we went away, I'd asked about his latest book, and it was I couldn't come up with the title of it, and I asked Don what it was, and apparently he doesn't.
Worse than I could.
Well, you were talking about celebrities in Roswell,
Yes.
and
Touched by Roswell Crash Encounters of the Rich and Famous.
Okay.
Obviously everyone from John Denver to Edgar Mitchell to Demi Moore to William Shatner and Roy Thinnis and everybody and anyone who has had any connection, whether entertainment or political or professional sports. So it's a fun book. It's a lot of personal anecdotes involving these celebrities and their connection to Roswell. So we had a lot of fun putting it together. A lot of hundreds of pictures throughout. And so that's the current outcropping of the Roswell situation. But I wanted to point out too, Kevin, quickly, Leveland, one of the best cases of all time. And the point is, you came up with new witnesses. You came up as far as with new testimonies. And I applaud you for that. And it just solidifies the case even further.
Well, I even found and I don't want to give away things. I even found out that there were Air Force officers involved in seeing the object close up and probably stalled their car engine, but all that information disappeared. It's not in the Project Blue Book files, and you got to say, well, the Air Force obviously knew about it. What I was going to say is the one comment you made about lots of pictures in the book is what criticism of one of my books, it didn't have enough pictures.
I know.
And I'm thinking, what are you in the 4th grade?
And if anything, editors, publishers are reducing the number of pictures because they're so strict on the resolutions, on the number of pixels, that it has to almost be a first-hand original picture before they even accept it. I mean, they have you jump through more and more hoops. You would think, as far as with the formatting, that almost like a digital camera, that you can do it practically as you write it and drop the picture in and scan it and have the layout. And as in the past, where you submitted hard copy and you just relied on them to essentially assemble it and put it together correctly. It's not as simple as it looks, folks. It's becoming even stricter as we speak.
Well, when we went away talking about Trinity and Jacques Vallée, and your encounter with Ramey Baca, who is, I guess, the only living witness who was there in 1945. Everybody else had passed away before anybody really investigated this, including Paula Harris, who I think jumped on the case in the very early beginnings of this century. I have a copy of an interview she conducted with him in 2010, which I looked at and read through the whole thing at the time and decided, this just doesn't make any sense to me at all.
What, if I might quickly interject, and it's something that neither you or I have discussed, and I really haven't talked with anybody else about, but it was at the time of the alien autopsy, and we don't call it Roswell. You and I, made sure that they didn't refer to it as the Roswell alien autopsy from the very beginning, and mainly because they couldn't tie it directly to the case. And there were no witnesses that said that's exactly what I saw back in 1947, that type of thing. So when Michael Hessman and Philip Mantle originally came to New Mexico, and they were seeking out additional testimony and outside information regarding other prospective crashes. And I remember that they originally latched onto a possible crash in the San Antonio, New Mexico area. And they tried to tie it into the alien autopsy, this this phantom photographer that was editing, old Elvis footage, and happened to stumble upon, what he still had in one of his film canisters down in his basement, that type of storyline. And so some of this had its origins back at that time already, where this story was languishing and where to plug it in. And I honestly believe that Ramey Baca, at first, when he was introduced to me, he was trying to plug it into the Roswell incident. That's why he said it happened in 1947. He was very specific as far as in my meeting him at that time. And then to see that, well, depending on who you talk to, all of a sudden now it's 1945, and it ties in with the first atomic bomb detonation at Trinity, just to the south of there. And so the fact that Vallée has gone to great lengths to tie in with the atomic bomb detonation. And we talk about how investigators, researchers make the foolhardy mistake of trying to think aliens, so to speak. And I think that's almost like what Sagan, the late Carl Sagan, would even suggest. Well, certainly if aliens were arriving here on planet Earth, they would come see me first. That I'm the number one scientist in my mind. And so I sense a little bit of that as far as with Jacques Vallée as well, that he's trying to reason as to why that location, why at that time, and that is enough for him to say, well, let's go down and investigate this. And
I don't object to the investigation. I object to the testimony. They said, well, we have a new witness. The new witness wasn't even born in 1945. She appears on the scene 10 or 12 years later.
Correct.
Having been to the site then. I mean, we've been to the Roswell site or sites.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many times. I mean, that doesn't make us firsthand witnesses to the event. We can
never, right.
We can look at the scene. But I think when I looked at the book, I could not understand Vallée getting involved in this because the story seemed to be so far out. But then we see this paper that he's just written, which will be published online now, and it's the same kind of thing. It's the same kind of stuff. There's a case from Council Bluffs, Iowa, which I'd never heard of, from December 17th, 1977. And I've got a blog posting about it now to give the basics of it. Flaming object was seen falling into the lake park in Council Bluffs area. All kinds of manifestations, very hot, very molten type object. Metal was recovered from it. They don't know what it was, but the metal turned out to be carbonized steel. I mean, it was terrestrially manufactured material. We don't know how it got there. We don't know if it's some kind of hoax. We don't know what it might have fallen off of, exactly what's going on there. But I don't understand how we move this to the extraterrestrial, just because we can't explain how it got there. And this thing in San Antonio is sort of the same thing. He got this debris, and there's a link to the debris so the people can see what it looks like on my blog. There's a link to pictures of the debris. But it turns out to be parts of a windmill, I guess. It's
exactly what it is.
The UFO hit. Well, what good does that do us?
So, as I had said at the beginning of the program, that it's Jacques has come full circle in that where Hynek wrestled with the vast distances between star systems, he just couldn't accept that a physical object could travel from point A to point B, that type of thing. But yet, the longer he was involved, he had to accept that we were dealing with someone else's hardware, physical, as far as you go across the street, kick the tires, so to speak. And we witnessed that evolution. We saw that the only thing that's going to be substantial in establishing the reality of the phenomena is something that you can display to the public, hold it in your hand, and maybe like a piece of memory material, and this isn't made here. See it for yourselves, that type of thing. And as Hynek, became older, and so often as I witnessed him, he would make that comment over and over again. I'm an old man in a hurry. I'm an old man in a hurry. And I did an article on the whole Trinity book that was published in England. It was published in Italy. It's now going to be published in France. And I believe Enigma magazine just ran it here in the States. And I compare Jacques' behavior almost to that of a more desperate, frantic Hynek, in that and Jacques, who is now almost 10 years older than Hynek was at that time, that he's becoming more desperate for answers. And as a result, he realizes too that it's going to take a piece of physical evidence. But he's searching in the wrong category. He's searching in the wrong cases. And you would think that in his position, that he would have a little more clout even with certain governments, that he could say, hey, I'm 80 years old. I'd like to know before I go. I'd like to see something before it's too late. Instead of stumbling around out in the desert and into all that gypsum bush, thinking that something's going to pop up that was left behind after 77 years.
Well, you offer an opportunity for a brilliant transition here, because you were talking about the vast distances and the physicality of getting from there here. And Avi Loeb, the Harvard astronomer who's made quite a name for himself in the last few months, talking about the solar system being invaded by some kind of an alien artifact in his project Galileo.
Right.
I've talked to him, I think 3 times about this. I keep getting invited to the press conferences, which I think is kind of neat. They're always held over the internet. So right. I can participate by invitation only. So I think that's kind of interesting as well. But Avi Loeb is of the opinion that these artifacts that he's searching for, and the artifact that he believes, well, the artifact that did pass through the solar system, be it artificial or natural, was tens of thousands of years old and had traveled for tens of thousands of years to get here. And that's what he's now searching for. So that kind of negates the vast distances argument. But I think his theory is these artifacts are sort of an announcement of here, we're here, as opposed to sending out messages in bottles. We don't know who's going to get it. We don't know how long it's going to take, but eventually it's going to arrive somewhere and somebody's going to see it and they're going to realize that we're here, or we were here at one point. I don't know how long a industrial civilization such as ours is going to survive and how it may change in the future to change their attitudes and the way they operate. So we've got all those questions to deal with. Have you had any interaction with Avi Loeb? And I'm going to have to break away, so keep it short.
Well, no, through colleagues, certainly. And I appreciate the fact that he is reaching out to the UFO community, that he realizes that there is a rich history of the phenomena that he needs to appraise himself of. So he then will make his final efforts as far as steered in the right direction. So I compliment him, I applaud him, and the fact that, as a late colleague, as far as of his, Dr. John Mack of Harvard Medical School, that Dr. Mack, who broke, the ground as far as in risking his tenure at the college, that here Avi Loeb, I think, is taking a safe approach, as you described, that it's something still out there. It hasn't arrived here. But nonetheless, it's acknowledging that something artificial, something not manufactured off the planet is there, and we need to investigate this.
Well, I think his attitude was this was something that it was an alien artifact that passed through our solar system. It had not originated in our solar system, but it could be a natural object. But his attitude was it was probably an artificial object, and that was what he wanted to do, and figured there would be more of them out there. We're going to have to take a break here. I'm with Don Schmitt. We're talking about UFOs. We're talking about what's been going on in the last year. And I mentioned frequently my book, Level Land, which will be coming out on January 6th, much to my surprise. I thought it was going to be delayed a little bit longer than that. I've done Roswell in the 21st century. I have a book on the Socorro called Encounter in the Desert, which deals with Lonnie Zamora and his sightings. So if you get a chance, head on over to Amazon and take a look at that. And we will be back right after this, so please stick around. And we are back with Don Schmitt. We've been talking about what's happened in the last year in the world of ufology. We were talking about Avi Loeb and his Galileo project, which is being set up to search for visiting alien artifacts. And by alien, I can define that as either natural or manufactured artifacts. Natural alien artifact would be something that was came from outside the solar system, let's put it that way, from another star system, wherever it might be. It may have been traveling for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. So we were talking about that, and I think Don and I agree that it was marvelous to see a prestigious scientist such as Avi Loeb at a prestigious university come out and start talking about alien artifacts and artificial artifacts. It was his opinion based on his observations of the object that passed through the solar system, I guess earlier in the year, that it was artificial. It wasn't traveling very fast. I think it traveled fast enough to reach the speed necessary to the escape velocity to leave the solar system. But that certainly creates a situation where the object is going to be traveling for tens of thousands of years. We launched, was it the Viking space probe, the Voyager probes in the 1970s. And one of them has left our solar system after traveling all these decades. It's just outside the solar system. That's all the further it's gotten. And the suggestion was it would reach another star system in some 80,000 years. So 80,000 years, it may pass through a solar system, and Avi Loeb's counterpart in that system would detect it and say, hey, here's an artificial probe coming through our solar system.
Well, I think you and I should spearhead as far as an effort to reinstate Pluto as the 9th planet. Because as we learned with Voyager as it passed Pluto, it's a beautiful sphere. I mean, glowing blue, it's just a gorgeous example of what might have envisioned, like Venus actually looking. You had Mars, the red planet, and Saturn with its rings, the size of Jupiter, that type of thing. Whereas Pluto looks at least as though there was, or there could have at one time been, an atmosphere. Okay. So, and you mentioned even Viking. Viking was in the 70s too, because you had Viking, was it 1 or 2 that landed on Mars on the 1976, the actual 4th of July, celebration weekend, that type of thing. But the object that, that Loeb, and you're talking that the chairman of the astronomy department at Harvard, the very chairman, and that this object was the size of a football field, and though it looked as far as natural, but it didn't behave natural. In fact, that he, as soon as he concluded that it was, internally controlled, that there was something steering it, so to speak, and that he would use it to launch, as far as the Project Galileo, as far as you described, to look for other space artifacts, space relics, something that is not manufactured here on planet Earth. And the fact that he's even gotten the likes of Seth Salchak, as far as from SETI, to even be on his board. I think he's covered, in that case, SETI's covering themselves in the event, there should be such additional discoveries made. Well, we would have seen it eventually anyway, but we're focused much deeper, into deep space, so to speak. And we're listening for, that radio signal that someday, that wow signal that they're going to pick up. So
the one thing that I noticed in my discussions with him And when I got him on the program, I think I got it under his skin a little bit because I was talking about the vast history of ufology that you had mentioned earlier. And that they sort of rejected out of hand that. And I can understand some of that simply because a lot of the data wasn't collected in a very methodical way, a very scientific way. A lot of it is anecdotal. And a lot of the conclusions being drawn are based on faulty assumptions. We can take a look at any number of UFO sightings where it seems to be very mysterious, but if you get all the information, I was going to say dig down to the bottom of it, and I just didn't want to use the term dig down because it's become such a cliche, but you get deeply into the information and you find out where the data has been slightly massaged, not necessarily purposely, but somebody just cherry picks the information they want. So it becomes mysterious and you learn a little bit more about it and you find an explanation. And I think that's one of the reasons they were kind of hesitant to accept UFO information. And I suggested a couple of ways to doing it. And I was talking to him about this rich history that may provide us some clues. And I was thinking specifically of the electromagnetic effects. And we've got a large body of cases where the UFO comes close to the ground, interacts with the environment, stalls car engines, maybe it puts out lights in cities, animals react to it. So you've got an interaction with the environment in some fashion, and it may provide some clues, at least to some of the UFOs. Because when we talk about ufology, of course, the electromagnetic effects is a very small subset of the entire ufological spectrum. But I thought there might be something of interest there. And I was thinking, again, specifically of Levelland because of the fact in that case, you have witnesses at least 13 separate locations, independently reporting basically the same thing in a matter of 90 minutes or 2 hours on November 2nd, November 3rd, reporting it to the sheriff's office and that sort of thing, and doing it in such a way that the sheriff eventually goes out to take a look at it. And there are officers from Reese Air Force Base, which is in Lubbock. Lubbock is 15 minutes. I think the base is like 20 minutes from Levelland, given the situation. I've been down there and driven through the area. Levelland turned out to be a lot bigger than I thought it was last time I drove through it. But the point simply is you've got Air Force officers involved in it as well. And when we get down to looking at the case file, well, the Air Force only counts three people saw the object. Well, that's not true. In their own file, they list 5 people who saw the object and additional people who had the electromagnetic effects. So they were so busy arguing over the number of witnesses that they didn't bother with that. And I think the Air Force suppressed a lot of the information simply because they couldn't explain it and it was moving in a direction they didn't want to go. But my point simply was this, that I think there's something there in these cases that may be of benefit to Avi Loeb's investigation of these objects coming into the solar system. When you take a look at the cases for the electromagnetic effects, you might be able to determine something from those cases that would be beneficial in your search for additional artificial objects.
And you and I have demonstrated beyond many others that provided there remain witnesses, that you can still go back and reinvestigate any one of these cases. And when you, as you learned with Levelland, that when there are military witnesses involved, and it's like, well, where is their testimony? How come they are not in the Blue Book report? That was the same thing that Hynek would often describe regarding Dexter Ann Arbor, the Michigan sightings in '66. The one that he got in trouble just for attributing just that one witness description as swamp gas. He never intended that it would apply to all of the sightings, like from Riversdale, College and all that. But nonetheless, he lived with that for the rest of his life. But Hynek had talked to an Air Force officer. He interviewed him. He spent the better part of a half an hour, and he was a witness to what those students had seen at the time. And yet it was never part of the Blue Book file. So another example of where they were making sure, first of all, that they censored their own, and then making sure that the last thing they wanted was anyone within their own ranks speaking to the press, because it would have opened this up beyond their control. And Blue Book hardly, had enough personnel to even investigate to begin with, let alone real people, their witnesses back in and shut things down. I think too, for the fact that we see that so many of the cases are just swept away as possible and probable, that type of thing. But as both Hynek and even Ed Ruppelt, first director of Blue Book, would remind us that the more detail, the more witnesses, the more information they had on the case, the more solid. These were the best cases they had. So it wasn't a case of insufficient information and that they couldn't explain. It was, no, they couldn't explain the best cases they had with the most information. And that's why they would dance around. They would make just cursory as far as inquiries into, because they were afraid that it would become solid, that it would become something that they couldn't keep a lid on, so to speak. And Leveland's one of those examples.
Well, the Leveland case, if you take a look at the Blue Book file, what you see is some discussion amongst the various Air Force officers waiting for NICAP to make some kind of conclusion or some kind of report, because it's easier to respond to the report than to present your case without that kind of a framework to work from. And I think that's kind of illustrative. We'll just wait and see what they say and what they have. And once we know that, then we'll be able to respond to that information. But with the Leveland case, I mean, if you go through the file, the Blue Book file carefully, you'll see that it contradicts itself periodically. The other thing, when we moved to the Condon Committee, the University of Colorado study, and I always frame things this way simply because for the people who may not be familiar with all the terminology as you and I are, but when the Condon Committee did the University of Colorado study, they didn't go to Leveland. They came up with an excuse. You go to the index, Leveland comes up once talking about electromagnetic effects, but there was nothing they could do, and so they didn't bother. Their investigation started only 10 years after the Leveland cases. There's all kinds of things they could have done. Don Berliner went to Leveland, I think, in the middle of the 1970s, and actually talked to the sheriff. Did an article in Official UFO magazine about that, and the sheriff told him things then that did not come out in 1957. And later on, we learned that the sheriff had been told not to talk about it, not to say anything. So much later in his life, he did share that information with some people.
That's precisely as we both have described that. And I'm encouraging colleagues in Illinois right now, as far as the 2007 O'Hare incident, that many of the United Airlines personnel are now retired. Pilots, both on the ground and possibly in the air, traffic controllers, runway, tarmac as far as personnel, to now track these people down, talk to these people, get them on the record when they may finally be able to talk, that the gag order, is no longer applies. And so you just can't say, well, it was a good case and then leave it alone. You need to either reinvestigate, you need to either track down additional witnesses, you need to either solidify what you have to make your case, or you have not performed due diligence. And it's why, whether it was Socorro, whether it was Leveland, whether it was the DC overflights of 52, the fact that you don't realize until you actually go back and you go, oh my God, I have a new witness, or I have new information relevant to the case. And there are not enough of us that are still doing that. And because it takes work, it's an effort. You have to have a commitment. And as you and I both had when we first started back in late 88, and then actually February of 89, when we first went to New Mexico, we were going to allow the evidence to take us wherever it did. We had no preconceived theories. You and I were both skeptical on the case. And I think, just getting back to ballet quickly for a moment. If you have a preconceived position as to what happened, you're going to, steer the course of your investigation along that course.
Well, let me interrupt here. Because I'm going to have to take a break. But since you brought up ballet again, let's talk about Hubertus, because in his paper, he makes a claim in that paper that I found very interesting, and it's something that I had never seen before. And I think it's important to understand the Ubatuba physical sample that was explored in 1957. When we come back, Don and I will talk about that and take a look at my blog at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, because there is additional information available there. We will be back right after this, so please stick around. I am joined by Don Schmitt, ufologist for decades, as have I. I think between us, we probably have around 50 years of UFO investigation. We were talking about all sorts of things that happened in the last year. Before we went to the break, I had mentioned the Ubatuba sample and the Jacques Vallée paper. Vallée in that paper, and I don't know if you caught this or not, Don, he said the Ubatuba sample was picked up in 1933 or 1934.
He's off by 20 years. Yeah. I mean, how do you?
No, he says what happened was the person who picked it up didn't send it to the newspaper until 1957. So we've all been using the 1957 date as the date of the incident, September of 1957.
If that's correct, wow, that's quite, talk about pre-modern, age of ufology, 15 years before it starts.
But if you look at it from another point of view, it destroys even more so the provenance of the sample.
Right.
Because we always had heard the story, the guy picked it up on the beach and sent it to the reporter. We didn't know who the guy was that picked it up on the beach and sent it to the reporter. We don't know who picked it up or how many hands it passed through before it got to the reporter now. In 1957. The other problem, it was with Dr. Lavio Fontes, who was a colleague of the Lorenzens, who got the sample to them. And I think if we talk to our Brazilian colleagues, we find out that Fontes' reputation isn't the greatest among them now, as they kind of delve back into some of the cases he explored.
I had the experience when Dr. Peter Sturrock had actually presented Vallée with a couple of the fragments. And I got to look at them under a microscope. And I was surprised that the fragment that I seen very much resembled what geologist Frank Kimbler is finding at the Roswell debris field. And nothing unusual. It's mostly aluminum. And yet I know the supposed Ubatuba was titanium.
No, magnesium.
Magnesium, and but I thought there was some titanium.
Small bits of contamination. I think aluminum is one of the contaminants, but it's a very small. It was a magnesium of a purity that supposedly wasn't obtainable in 1957. Certainly wasn't obtainable in 1933. If Vallée is right about that. But we have no provenance. We don't know where it came. All we know is this magazine writer got his hands on it in 1957.
Right. So it still comes down to the radioisotope as far as lab, as far as analyses that determine as far as the physical makeup, how at the molecular level, how things, are combined, and then assume as far as a particular, metal composition. It's the same standards that exist today would be applied. But, it was supposedly the Lorenzens even had a piece as far as that they kept as far as at the APRO with the APRO files. And that was a piece that disappeared as the files were rifled through. And to this day, we still don't know what the situation is with the APRO files. And a lot of things were taken, a lot of things are missing. So things can be replaced. Things can also be substituted. So we don't, again, you're absolutely correct. We don't know the provenance. We don't know if it's even the original sample.
We don't even know if the story is true.
To begin with, right.
All we know is a newspaper reporter said, or the magazine writer said that he received this sample of something. Supposedly the craft was seen to explode in the air and the debris rained down on the beach and into the ocean.
Right.
The guy picked up some samples and sent it to this magazine writer. Well, was Was it 1957 when he saw it, when that happened? Or was it 1933 and 1934? That Vallée now says that's the situation. And so
see, anytime the dates change, and it was the same problem we have as far as getting back to Vallée and as far as the San Antonio with Remy Baca. Why did he change the date? Why tell me one date and then later he talks to another researcher and it's 2 years earlier? Right? As far as I'm concerned, right there, you've disqualified yourself.
Well, I think, you look at it, the idea was that 1945 is a response to our detonation of atomic weapons, and is right close to where the first atomic bomb was exploded. But my question is, where is the craft? If you can detect a nuclear explosion on a planet in another solar system, which is very problematic, how fast can you get there to investigate it? And the light wouldn't have gotten to the closest star system for 4 years.
4.3, yes, yeah, Alpha Centauri, right.
So then you have to say, well, where was the craft? Why would they respond to this flash of light on Earth that quickly, within a matter of weeks as opposed to years? So that there really is no relationship between the atomic testing at White Sands and the Trinity site and all of that. I think they just are jumping on that bandwagon to add a note of legitimacy to the claims.
And see, at least with Roswell, we could say there was a 2-year gap. That even if we would use the analogy like a Starship Enterprise, something that was more in our vicinity, and yet it still took 2 years. Even Blue Book had pretty much determined that there were more UFO sightings in New Mexico at that time than anywhere else in the country. So as I always say, it was as though someone else was interested in our military potential. And what better place than New Mexico at that time? And it may indeed have been that flash. But it's 2 years later. It isn't within days, as Vallée would have us believe.
Well, I think we've pretty well hammered the Trinity site into the ground here. I think there's great problems with that book. There's a real lack of investigative depth to it.
Well, the behavior of the military, I mean, my God, I mean, they were acting like school children. There was no discipline among them and behaving as though this, was a downed airship from 1897, and they were having fun with it, and they didn't care if they had spectators observing, their recovery operation. And then the thought that they were burying and burning actual wreckage to speed up the retrieval operation. No, you know that better than I do, Kevin. As far as that's hardly military protocol, even at that time.
Well, I think the military protocol would have been like stricter in that time frame than it is today.
Yeah, I would agree.
That matter. But that was the thing. We've collected the craft. We've got it on a flatbed truck. Well, we've done that, guys. Let's go to lunch.
Let's go to lunch. Leave it unattended. Let the boys come and pick up whatever souvenirs they want and hang them up on their Christmas tree. We don't care. Yeah.
Oh, so I don't understand I guess it's the name of Vallée that was the catalyst in that book. Had it been anything else, that nobody would have cared about it. But I think it's indicative of where his mind is going, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. I mean, he's casting about now for any case that has metallic debris associated with it.
Final answers. While I still have time, I want a piece of. I want to hold something in my hand.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that we can dismiss that book, and we can dismiss that case unless there's some additional information comes about. And I always say that, I believe cattle mutilations have a terrestrial explanation, but I revisit that information periodically to make sure there's nothing new there, that I haven't missed something, that there may be some kind of an extraterrestrial involvement. I don't know what it would be, but you have to look at the data, the latest data, to see where it's gone and where you are, and if there's any major changes in it.
See, that's where you and I, as far as we had a different methodology as far as investigation, and that instead of where most, it's very linear, that it's straight ahead, and you do your interviews and they're left behind. You and I, it was very circular, because new witnesses would then present a new line of questioning to then retrace and go back to a Walter Hott, go back to a Glenn or any other witness. So it was always very circular, yet still progressing forward. And I'm afraid that so many, they have this direct approach instead of allowing the evidence, direct their investigation. And I think it's always a good mark of a journalist when they step back and they ask themselves, but what if this witness, what if this individual is telling the truth? What if there any part of it smacks of reality? And here I am just summarily dismissing it without at times coming back and going, I need to revisit this. I need to ask another question. And I think that's always the hallmark of someone who is not afraid of not only making mistakes, but also willing to look at reality and accept it for whatever it is, no matter how sinister, no matter how symbiotic, that truth is truth, reality is reality.
Well, let's do this, because Don, we're going to have to take our break here. For those paying attention, Don and I will be back in a week to continue our discussion. We'll complete it here in a few minutes, but we'll have it up in the next week. I did want to mention, because it kind of hits with where we're going. I did a book called UFOs in the Deep State, which some guy didn't like because the Project Mogul explanation answers Roswell. And I thought, yeah, I'd like to respond to that. But the point simply is we're looking at all that kind of data that relates to what we're talking about. So for me, the book is UFOs in the Deep State, Encounter in the Desert, which is Socorro, Roswell in the 21st Century. I've got the Levelland book coming out called Levelland. Don, your latest books are?
Touched by Roswell, Close Encounters of the Rich and Famous, and we're doing a 75th rewrite edition of Witness to Roswell, which will be out this next June, commemorating the 75th anniversary coming up.
And there's, I still go through that case and find interesting little tidbits that make sense. And one of the things that came up is if Brazel brought debris to the sheriff's office on the first day and it was a mogul balloon, why the hell would Jesse Marcel go out to the ranch?
Well, exactly, Kevin. The idea that why did Blanchard dispatch not a couple of grunts just to humor Brazel, but he sends his two head of intel? And the point being that why send Cabot, the head of counterintelligence? And specifically, my position is it was in the event it was something indeed foreign, that would have been Cabot's specialty. So you make a good point.
So there we go. My blog is www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And of course, this show is appearing on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. And there's many fine shows being broadcast by X-Zone Broadcast Network. So take a look at the website at xzbn.net, and you'll find something that is completely different from what we're doing here and that sort of thing. In the next segment, we're going to talk about, I think, the idea that Einstein went to Roswell, which was a big factor that came up here just a few weeks ago. I talked to the author of the book, Einstein, when Einstein went to Roswell and that sort of thing, to get his take on where he came from and why he included so much MJ-12 stuff in it. And that's become kind of a controversial point here. You can find my interview with him, of course, at my blog. There's a embedded audio player there, and you can scroll down and find Peter Strasberg. Dr. Peter Strasberg is the fellow's name, and you can listen to our interview about that. And I will be back here with Don Schmitt, technically next week, talking about some of these sorts of things and making sure that you take a look at the blog I really have nothing else to say. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back in 167 hours.